More than 20 Russian targets were destroyed in only a few hours, and this sudden wave of losses has become one of the most intense drone assaults recorded this year. The scale of destruction surprised military observers because Ukraine relied on low-cost drones that slipped into the rear and hit places Russia once believed were protected. Command posts fell after precise strikes, ammunition sites erupted in long chains of explosions, and transport vehicles burned across forest lines while a key supply bridge collapsed after a drone found the only open route beneath its structure. Each impact revealed how quickly the balance can shift when cheap weapons move faster than heavy armor. These scenes highlight a deeper risk for the coming months because a rear area that collapses in minutes may leave the front lines in Donetsk and Zaporozhye exposed to new kinds of pressure. A battlefield built around tanks, fixed depots, and long supply roads is now facing tools that move quietly, adjust their path in real time, and strike with accuracy that older defensive systems cannot match. Stay with us as the story continues, because one question now defines the direction of this conflict. If this moment is only the beginning of low-altitude drone warfare, the next phase may show how far both sides can push technology once they commit fully to a race that has no clear limit. The first wave of strikes began when a fiber-optic drone slipped into a Russian dugout and created a chain of reactions that showed how flexible this type of platform has become on the battlefield. The device entered the narrow opening of the shelter and hovered close to the floor as it was searching for the right moment to activate its charge. Russian soldiers in the trench crouched low and tried to watch every direction. Yet none of them realized that a fiber-optic drone was already hovering above their heads and preparing to drop a bomb from above. After locking onto the right spot, the drone released its payload and sent it down into the dugout. It detonated at the entrance and filled the dugout with debris. The short pause between the first approach and the explosion showed that the operator controlled the drone with enough precision to test the reaction of the enemy before committing to the final strike. Right after the dugout blast, a reconnaissance drone entered the same section of forest to map out new targets. Its camera scanned a large area of dense trees. It followed trails on the ground where branches were broken and the soil looked recently disturbed. These signs helped the operator locate groups of Russian soldiers resting between shifts. The drone flew above several improvised shelters built from logs and tarps. It spotted a small command post hidden behind a row of pine trees. The images showed a group of soldiers moving around a small makeshift shelter in the forest. No guard post was visible on the perimeter. That detail allowed the pilot to mark the coordinates for a follow-up strike. The first FPV sent toward the site moved through the upper branches and dropped straight onto the camouflaged position. Pieces of broken antennas and scattered boxes confirmed that the strike disrupted the ability of the Russian unit to coordinate movements in that sector. The short time between detection and impact showed how quickly Ukraine could convert reconnaissance data into a real attack. The next target was a truck that carried ammunition deeper inside the forest. The vehicle had stopped on a dirt path where the trees created a natural roof. The driver probably believed the thick branches would limit the drone's line of sight. However, the FPV approached from the front where the truck's cabin was exposed. The pilot guided it toward the engine block. This hit pattern has become a common way to disable a vehicle before it can leave the area. The drone crashed into the grill and caused an explosion that forced the crew to flee. The truck did not ignite immediately, but smoke rose from the hood as the engine failed. Because the path was too narrow for any escape move, the vehicle kept sliding forward while smoke poured from the hood, and it had no way to stop or turn back. The sequence of events in this part of the forest created a clear picture of how Ukraine used layered drone operations. A reconnaissance unit identified weak points, while the attack drones focused on isolated positions with limited protection. Each strike reduced the ability of Russian forces to regroup or maintain supply flow in that zone. The coordination between scouting and direct engagement showed a battlefield where mobility and quick decisions mattered more than heavy armor. Do you think targeting the engine first will become the standard FPV tactic next year? The most striking moment in this phase of the operation came when an FPV drone located a small bridge that Russian units depended on for moving supplies across a narrow valley. The span looked simple at first glance, yet it had been reinforced with 2 layers of camouflage netting on both sides. The pilot guided the drone toward the upper edge of the structure and tried to slip through an opening in the net. The frame of the drone brushed against the material and bounced back because the mesh had been pulled tight to block air vehicles. The pilot pulled away before the device lost control. The failed entry showed that the Russian side understood the risk from drones and had prepared basic defenses to interrupt direct strikes on the center of the bridge. The FPV hovered above the riverbank for a short moment while the operator searched for a new angle. The camera scanned the length of the bridge until it reached the darker area underneath the main beams. The space under the structure was narrow and filled with shadows. Despite the tight clearances, the pilot began to move the drone lower and closer to the pillars. The device tilted slightly to match the shape of the gap. The rotors almost touched the concrete as it slid forward into the dark corridor. Once the drone passed the last beam, the camera revealed objects placed along the underside of the bridge. The footage showed several shapes that matched improvised charges or demolition devices. These could have been planted by either side during previous skirmishes. The pilot kept the drone steady while he studied the placement of the objects. The FPV moved closer to the largest device, and the pilot made the decision to strike the center. The explosion that followed traveled along the row of charges and created a chain reaction that ripped through the structure above. Within seconds, the middle part of the bridge collapsed into the water. Dust rose into the air while broken concrete slabs slid down the embankment. This outcome matched the pattern that appeared in the video. Footage spread later by Russian channels confirmed that the bridge had been completely destroyed. Trucks and armored vehicles stood still on the road because the path was now cut off. The wreckage lay across the river and made movement impossible in that direction. The destruction of the bridge did more than break a key crossing point. It demonstrated how an FPV could overcome barriers that normally stopped ground troops. The drone avoided heavy defenses, found the weakest point, and used a confined space to deliver its warhead. The Russian response after the collapse remained unclear. Vehicles stayed on the road while soldiers inspected the ruins from a distance. The loss of this crossing created a new obstacle for any attempt to move reinforcements toward the front line. The narrow valley offered only a few alternative routes, and each path required extra time for movement. The strike delayed supply flow and forced Russian units to adjust their logistics plans. How do you view the fact that drones can now destroy structures that once needed heavy artillery to take down? The next stage of the operation moved toward a cluster of Russian supply points where ammunition had been stored in open areas. The strike began when an FPV drone reached a pile of landmines, with several ammo crates being loaded outside a small ammunition depot. The pilot guided the device toward the mine pile and charges. The blast from the first impact triggered a pressure wave that traveled through the line of crates. The reaction built up quickly because the shells contained propellant charges that burned at high speed. The fire spread across the site and produced rising smoke that marked the center of the explosion. The chain of blasts continued until the last row of crates collapsed. The length of the explosion suggested that the site had stored large-caliber rounds. After the ammunition dump was destroyed, the FPV squad received a new set of coordinates from a reconnaissance drone that had been circling above the tree line. The video feed revealed several military trucks parked along a dirt track. The engines were running because the crews were waiting for orders to move. The FPV pilot pushed his drone toward the first truck and lowered the altitude until the vehicle filled the screen. The drone flew toward the front of the truck where the engine block created a bright contrast. The blast hit the center of the hood and stopped the vehicle from moving. Flames rose from the engine and spread toward the cabin. The crew escaped in different directions while the pilot prepared a second drone for the next strike. The next truck was farther down the road. The movement of its wheels showed that the driver had tried to escape. The FPV closed the distance and struck the left side of the back panel. The blast damaged the steering mechanism and caused the truck to slide into a ditch. The crew left the vehicle because the engine had stopped. The two damaged trucks remained in place while the FPV team shifted its focus to the artillery site that the reconnaissance drone had marked earlier. The artillery position consisted of a single cannon that had fired several times during the previous hour. Marks on the ground revealed the direction of fire. The reconnaissance drone tracked the crew as they moved around the gun. The FPV pilot studied the angle of the barrel and prepared an approach from the rear. The drone dipped behind a small ridge and advanced toward the gun position. The blast hit the breach area and scattered metal fragments across the site. The cannon stopped working at once because the impact destroyed the mechanical parts that controlled loading. The crew abandoned the gun and ran toward the tree line. The reconnaissance drone confirmed that the weapon could no longer be used. With the artillery threat neutralized, the FPV team advanced toward a large hangar that stood on the edge of the supply zone. The building had a wide entrance and a metal roof that reflected sunlight. Inside the structure were several vehicles. The reconnaissance drone showed a mixture of military and civilian types. The FPV moved through the open doorway and settled above the central aisle. The pilot selected a light utility vehicle and sent the drone downward. The explosion destroyed the front half of the car and sent smoke through the building. The pilot switched to a second drone which entered the hangar from the same route. The next target was a supply truck parked near the back wall. The strike ignited fuel stored in the vehicle and produced a bright flash. The fire spread along the floor and forced Russian personnel to leave the building. The hangar burned for several minutes. Thick smoke rose into the air while the reconnaissance drone recorded the collapse of the roof. The destruction of this site removed a wide range of supply options for nearby Russian units. The strikes also showed that large storage buildings offered little protection once an FPV gained access through an open entrance. The next phase of the fighting revealed how exposed Russian infantry had become once FPV drones entered the forest. The first incident took place on a narrow trail where a Russian soldier attempted to withdraw from the front line. The path was covered with fallen branches and loose wires that had been left behind after earlier movements. The soldier stepped into one of the branches and lost his balance. His foot became trapped and he struggled to pull himself free. The FPV pilot saw the movement from a distance and directed the drone toward the trapped figure. The soldier tried to drag himself to the side of the path, but the drone closed the gap and detonated near his position. Another event unfolded in a nearby clearing. A Russian infantryman spotted an incoming FPV and fired several rounds at it. One bullet hit the drone and shook the camera. The pilot adjusted the angle and steadied the device. The drone lost some speed yet kept enough force to continue the attack. The infantryman attempted to run toward a fallen tree, but the FPV dropped to a lower height and advanced in a straight line. The explosion followed seconds later. The reconnaissance team then shifted attention to a cemetery near the edge of the forest. The site contained old stone markers and several dugout pits that Russian troops had used as temporary shelter. The drone hovered above the area and scanned along the rows of graves. A faint movement behind one of the stones made the pilot change direction. By lowering the drone close to the ground, the camera picked up the outline of a soldier attempting to hide. The pilot directed an FPV toward the pit and guided it to climb on top of the soldier's hiding place. Dust covered the lens during the explosion, but the reconnaissance drone confirmed that the target had been hit. A similar situation occurred deeper inside the forest. Several Russian soldiers were resting under a line of bushes that had been used as concealment. The reconnaissance drone observed the group from above and noticed slight movements in the leaves. The FPV unit launched a drone that flew just above the surface of the ground. The low angle made it difficult for the soldiers to hear the device because the sound blended with the background noise of the forest. When the drone reached the bushes, the men tried to scatter, but the pilot locked onto the closest figure and completed the strike. The event showed that the combination of zoom capability and ground-level flight allowed the drones to pick out individuals even when they stayed under dense cover. The next stage of the operation showed how FPV units targeted Russian equipment that had been hidden under the forest canopy. The reconnaissance drone moved above the tree line and watched the ground for small shifts in color and shape. A group of military vehicles stood under a cluster of branches that had been placed to break the outline of the metal frames. The camera caught a slight reflection from one of the roofs when the wind pushed the leaves aside. The pilot dropped the drone to a lower height and confirmed that a command vehicle was parked near a narrow dirt road. An FPV departed from a launch point behind a ridge and followed the guidance feed. The drone dived toward the hood of the vehicle and hit the tank at the back. Smoke rose through the branches as the reconnaissance drone continued scanning the forest. The search then moved to a different sector where Russian crews had positioned a light artillery piece between two tall trees. The gun crew had covered the barrel with cloth and added branches around the wheels. During a sweep, the reconnaissance drone detected a slight vibration that suggested the weapon was being prepared for use. The FPV team decided to hit the optical system because damaging that part would stop the crew from aiming later. The drone flew close to the ground, climbed a short distance, and struck the area around the site. The crew tried to pull back into a small ditch, but the hit had already disabled the weapon. Another incident involved a supply truck that had been left near a shallow pit. The driver had covered the cargo area with a layer of cut branches and moved several logs around the wheels. The camouflage hid most angles, but the drone noticed repeated movements under the cover as soldiers checked the boxes. The impact set the supplies on fire and forced the nearby troops to run toward another tree line. The reconnaissance drone captured the spread of flames as the truck burned through its cargo. The forest search revealed yet another hidden asset when the drone spotted faint tracks that led to a small clearing. At the end of the track was a short-range launcher that had been placed under a thick layer of branches. The vehicle was turned off to avoid detection, but the camera picked out a straight edge that did not match the shape of the surrounding ground. The FPV followed a curved path between several trees and hit the rear engine compartment. The explosion filled the clearing with dust and sent debris across the trail. The loss of the launcher removed a support point that Russian units had planned to use once the fighting intensified. These strikes showed how FPV teams focused on weak points rather than only chasing full destruction. Targeting optics, engines, or barrels forced the Russian side to abandon equipment even when the main frame remained intact. The combination of reconnaissance drones and FPV units created a cycle in which one platform searched while the other delivered the strike. The continuous pattern of detection and attack made the forest feel smaller for Russian forces because every attempt to hide left a small sign that drones could pick up. The damage to command vehicles, artillery pieces, supply trucks, and launchers created a chain reaction that slowed movement and reduced coordination. The most striking part of these attacks was not the size of the blasts, but the way the battlefield seemed to shrink the moment FPV drones appeared. In only a few hours, the strikes exposed a difficult truth for Russia, because every dugout, command post, bridge, and supply point turned into a target once a drone caught even the smallest movement. Nothing stayed hidden and nothing felt safe as the hits kept coming from different directions. These scenes point to a bigger shift that is changing modern conflict. Warfare is moving away from slow and costly firepower and toward precise attacks that use small devices to cause damage far beyond their price. The explosions we saw were only the visible part of the story because the real impact lies in the growing reach of cheap aerial weapons that pressure enemy lines without warning. If that system grows stronger, Russia's rear areas may face steady pressure through the winter. Yet the key question remains open. Can Russia adapt fast enough to shield its supply routes, or will drone warfare set the tone for the next phase of the conflict? Tell us what you think about this new race. If you want more updates, remember to like, share, and subscribe to Military Force.